Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Sabbath services. Now, why are there so many attacks against the Passover? What do you think? What is the most important thing between all of us as individuals and on an individual basis? What is the most important thing in our lives? Contact with God. Covenant, yes, but that also means contact with His Spirit. Okay? Now, who does not want us to have contact with God? Satan the devil. So, Satan the devil, we know, in 2 Corinthians, the 11th chapter, he has his ministers that appear as ministers of righteousness. And even Satan transformed himself into an angel of light. So they come bringing false doctrines, and they first like to set the stage by dumbing down the people and dumbing down the ministry. So when they bring it, like they did in Worldwide, they had a Greek expert who was so high-minded that no one was able to ask him an intelligent question because he was so smart. Stavronides was his name, and he was the agent to completely undermine the truth within WCG. Now let's come to John 13. Because this tells you something tremendously important. And you need to understand that Jesus said there in Luke the 6th chapter, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not practice the things that I tell you?" Okay. Now in Matthew the 7th chapter, it says, "Why call you me Lord, Lord, and you do not the will of the Father?" Now that's not contradictory because Jesus did everything that the Father said he should do, right? What he says I should say, I say. What he told me to do, I do. This is the commandment that I had from him. I lay down my life willingly, and that I may receive it back. Okay? All of that. Now here, Mark 13 with the foot washing. Now how many people really have foot washing today? Not Mark, but John. John 13. Okay? And when Jesus came to Peter, he said to him, "You shall not wash my feet, not ever." Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash you, you have no part with me." Now, when we are washing one another's feet, and we have the Spirit of God, we have the Spirit of the Father and the Spirit of Christ, the two parts of the Holy Spirit in our mind. So as we do this, it is as if Jesus were washing our feet. Okay? So you need to understand that, how important and how deep that relationship is with God that he wants to have with us. Okay? Now then, want to cover something back in Exodus 12. Let's go back there. Exodus 12. Now this is where Israel had its first Passover, and I'll emphasize that. Okay? Now, there is a doctorate who says he has read the Passover book, and I've gone halfway through his video, so I need to go through it. But he made a mistake that almost everyone makes. In their study, they leave out certain important things. Now, we will see, we'll follow the chronology here very carefully. Okay? We know that they were to pick a lamb on what day of the first month? 10th day. They were to keep it up until the 14th. When did the 14th begin? At sundown as the 13th ended, right? Then they were to roast it. They weren't to boil it. And the lamb that they took had to be less than a year old. So they couldn't have taken a lamb that was born before the season before this Passover that they took it. Most lambs are born somewhere in February, early March. So a lamb that's 8 days old or older could be used. Now, if you have a small lamb, and they figured it was for 10 people, if you had a household that had fewer people, then you would share the lamb. Okay? What were they to do with the blood? Once they killed it. This was domestic killed Passover. Okay? They were to take the blood and put it on the side post and the lintel of the doors of their what? Houses. Josephus says they were in their tents in Ramses. Not possible. Little sidebar on Josephus. What was he? Pharisee. A Pharisee and a priest of the first course. He was alive all during the beginning of the church, maybe even to the last part of Jesus' ministry. In his original copy, there is not one reference to Jesus. Now, as a Pharisee, what do you suppose his job as a historian was to do for the Jews? To eliminate any historical evidence of Jesus. See? Do they do that today? Yes, indeed. All right. So after they put the blood on the side post and the lintel, they were to stay in their house, they were to eat the lamb, and at midnight, God started killing the firstborn. And he spared their firstborn because of the blood. Now, this paper by Kuhn and Graby advocates that at that time they kept time like we did, and after it was midnight they could leave. Okay? That's what they said in the paper. Okay? Now then, there are those who combine the Passover and the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And how do they do that? By not reading these scriptures. Okay? Verse 21, Exodus 12. Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said to them, I'm giving you this message personally. You can put away your smartphones. I want it direct to you. Now, I'm being sarcastic. There was no other way to get the instruction to all the children of Israel in their houses in the land of Goshen so that they would all know what to do. So he called for the elders, and here are the instructions that he gave them to do, in addition to these that are recorded before that. Verse 21, Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said to them, Draw out and take a lamb for yourselves according to your families and kill the Passover lamb. And you shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the bowl and strike the lintel and the two side posts with the blood in the bowl, and none of you shall go out of the door of his house until I've killed the firstborn. It says until sunrise. Now the King James says morning. The Hebrew here is bokur, B-O-Q-U-E-R, which means sunrise. Now why did God give those instructions this way? Can even a 5-year-old understand when sunrise is? He couldn't have them coming out, leaving their houses at any old time. Okay? So, since they left Ramses, what did they do on the day portion of the Passover? After sunrise. They left their houses, spoiled the Egyptians along the way, and they were willing to give them everything. Everything. And they assembled at Ramses. Now, if you are to stay in your house until sunrise, you can't leave that night. Okay? And it says that they left by night. So if you're in your house till sunrise, half the day is already gone, correct? Okay. Now then, let's read on. Verse 23, for the Lord will pass through to strike the Egyptian when he sees the blood upon the lintels and on the two side posts. The Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to come into your houses to strike you. Okay? Now, did all of the firstborn of the Egyptians die instantly? Or was it like a wave passing through? We don't know, but I don't think it was instant. I think it was a wave passing through. Okay? Now notice verse 24. You shall observe this thing as a law to you and to your children forever. Now what was the law? The instructions he gave. Select the lamb on the 10th, kill it at the beginning of the 14th, take the blood, put it on the side post and the upper lintel, eat it that night, stay in your house, don't go out of your house until morning. All right? Now let's read on because we'll find something else. And it shall be when you have come into the land which the Lord will give you according as he has promised, that you shall keep this service. Now I want you to listen carefully to the next two verses. And it will be when your children say to you, what does this service mean to you? Then you shall say, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover. Now, remember Deuteronomy 16 we had last week? Those were Passover offering. Those were for the redemption of the firstborn, because the Passover is a household sacrifice, not an offering. Why is it not an offering? Because it was never to be done at the temple or tabernacle. Okay? Again, Numbers 28:16. Hold your place here and let's just turn back there for a minute. 28:16. What we need to understand is that the Jews, because of their traditions, have blinded their minds to understand the scriptures. And when you read any of their commentaries written by their intelligentsia, they talk about the writer of this book or the writer of that book. They don't talk about it as the inspired Word of God. Why? Because if they did, that would undo all their traditions. See? But they say that Moses gave oral traditions. Well, if he gave oral traditions, why did God tell him to write it down? Okay? Now, Numbers 28, it starts out, here's what you're to offer day by day. Then here's what you're to offer on the Sabbath day. Then here's what you're to offer at the beginning of your months. Now then, we come down here to verse 16. Here's the Passover day. What offerings do you see that are commanded at the temple? None. The only offering would be morning and evening sacrifice, correct? Because that was to be every day. Okay. Why is there no sacrifice listed here in the midst of the obligatory sacrifices to give at the tabernacle or temple? Because the Passover was to always be a home observed ceremony. And in the Passover book, we've got quotes by Jews to that very effect. Okay? So that's why. Now then, the Jews, yes, later did have temple sacrificed lambs for their Passover, which they ate the next night. So during the days of Jesus, you had the domestic Passover, which Jesus and the disciples kept. We'll see this a little later. And they had the temple sacrifice of the lamb for those who followed the tradition of the diaspora, even though they were in the land of Judea. See? Now, what was the tradition of the diaspora? Yeah, why was it the 15th? Okay, since we're in Numbers, let's go back to Numbers 9. Now, Numbers 9 is also very interesting because if you follow everything that was done in all the chapters leading up to chapter 9, the offering started on the first day of the first month by every tribe. And every day one tribe would bring the same offering to the priest and the Levites. You can read that. How many tribes are there? 12. Actually 13. Levites are separate. Okay? And they were the ones to operate at the temple. Okay? Now then, this becomes important because if there were to be the temple sacrifice of the Passover lamb, then it should be right here in Numbers 9. But they didn't. So let's read it. Verse 1. And the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the first month of the second year after they came out of the land of Egypt, saying, let the children of Israel keep the Passover at its appointed time. Okay? In the 14th day of this month, between the two evenings. Bein Ha'arbaim. Now, what chapter establishes how God uses Bein Ha'arbaim? We covered that last week. Exodus 16. See? Exodus 16 is on a Sabbath day. He told them, in the morning you're going to get manna. Okay? Then at night, Bein Har-Baim, you're going to eat flesh. Now, when did God send the quail? Did he send them immediately after he said you're going to eat flesh and they came on the Sabbath day? What would happen if that's so? God would be breaking his own Sabbath day and causing the people to break the Sabbath day by killing and cooking. So, at sundown, okay, at sundown, Ba'erev, the quail came. Now, where did he put the quail? Question, where did he put the manna the next morning? He put the manna out around the camp. Okay? Now, they had to get up and go get it, because if they didn't get up and go get it before the sun got hot, it disappeared. Just think how you would get people up today if you had something that if they didn't get out and get it, they didn't eat. Okay? So that was their work. And what did he say to them on the sixth day? Get twice as much. And you can keep that over. But the first 5 days, if they kept it over, what happened? They had worms and it stunk. Okay? So, there was the miracle of the manna. And then he told them, don't go out on the Sabbath day to look for manna because you're not going to find any. So what did they do? They went out to look for manna and didn't find any. And what did God say? How long do you refuse to keep my law? Now, is it important to obey the voice of God? I mean, it was very simple. They got twice as much, but greed, we're going to go out and get it on the Sabbath day. So God didn't put any out there. Okay? Now then, back to the Sabbath and the quail. When does the Sabbath end? Sundown. When did God send the quail? Sundown. Now, you do have to get the quail before you eat them. And don't you think that's logical? You can't eat them before you get them. Okay? So they came sundown. And where did he put the quail? He dropped them all on the camp, on their tents. And he made them docile and easy to catch. Even the little kiddies probably went up and said, look, Mommy, I got one. Okay. And they skinned them, cleaned them, and roasted them, and ate them, Bein Har-Baim. Okay. So what does this tell us? Bein Har-Baim immediately follows sunset, and is translated between the two evenings, which is between sunset and dark. Okay? Now, Bokur, sundown, how long is it? No, Bokur is 5 minutes long. Okay? Why? Because you look at the horizon, and it takes 5 minutes for the sun to go below the horizon. Bokur is only 5 minutes long. Okay? What immediately follows after that is twilight, or between the two evenings. Now, when I was writing the Passover book, I wanted to get an exact timing of how long it would take the sun to go down. So I was coming back from Los Angeles, and I was over by San Luis Reservoir, and the dam had a perfectly flat top. So I pulled off over to an area where I'd be out of the traffic, and I watched the sun, and I timed it. and it took 5 minutes for the sun to go down. Okay? So Bokur is only 5 minutes. Bein Ha'arbaim is about an hour and 15 minutes, more or less, depending on what part of the year that you're looking at, but in the spring of the year, it's about an hour and 15 minutes. As I mentioned last week, when I was coming back from Daytona Beach, I looked out of the window, and I could look ahead, because we're flying to the west, the sun was going down, and I could see the sun going down, and I looked at the light as it comes back. Okay? And I could look back to where it was almost dark. Okay? Now, this follows all around the earth as it's turning. The earth turns. That's why we have that time. And it is a set time that God established between the two evenings, between sunset and dark. All right? Now that's a good question. That was just the killing and preparing and roasting. Okay? Now, the rest of the instructions for them, once they got it in the house and were roasting it, what did God tell them? You are not to leave anything until morning. Okay? You're to burn it with fire. So what we did when I was writing the book, we went up to Skip Emerson's. You remember Skip Emerson? And he raised little goats and little sheep, so he took 2 little goats, okay? And they had just been born about a month before, okay? So he knew how to kill them and clean them, so we timed it, okay? Strung them up with their hind feet, so their head is down, slit the throat, cut the blood, and then, to my astonishment, he just took the knife and went from the hind clear up to the chest, opened up the cavity, and all the innards are in a big bag. And then all he had to do was just, in order to get it started, he had to cut off at the rear end, then it just fell out, and then he cut the throat, and everything that was in the lamb was out. That took 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Then, we wanted to know how long was it to skin it. Well, when you know how to skin it, it doesn't take any length of time at all. He just took a knife and went like this, down along the side of the open rib cage, and he took his hands and he went whoop, 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 like that, and the thing was almost skinned in less than 5 minutes. Okay? So what happened? It took about 15 to 20 minutes, just say 20 minutes, to make it ready to roast. Okay? Now to roast it, they were to put in the liver and the kidneys and the heart into the cavity. Then they put it on a spigot and they roasted it. Could not be boiled. As a matter of fact, the Jews had a way of doing it that when they roasted it on a grill, you know, like a barbecue grill, if any of the meat that was on that, the juice came out and boiled, they couldn't eat that. They cut it. Okay? That's how particular that they were with it. All right? So we found out this. How long does it take to roast it? Okay? About an hour and a half. Okay? Because it's small. That's why you can't have a Passover calf, as we talked about last week, I mean, even a small calf would weigh about 60 pounds. Okay? So it was a lamb or a kid goat. Okay? Now then, they were to burn it all. So what did they do? They had to take the skin and cut that up in pieces so they could burn it in the fire where they were roasting. And I'm sure that they would put it in there piece by piece. That's what we did. We put it in piece by piece as it was roasting. And we found out it took about an hour and a half. All right? Then they had to eat it with bitter herbs. They had to be ready to go. They were to eat it in trepidation. Not in haste, that they were to leave immediately. That's a bad translation of the King James. Trepidation. Okay? Then they were to burn all the bones. There was to be nothing left. God did not want anyone to have a sacred bone chip as an idol to hold on to as a lucky charm that they had been passed over by God. They had to burn it. So what did we do? How long did it take to burn all the bones? Okay. Okay. Now, so we took home a lamb shank. That was the biggest part and the hardest to burn. Okay. We took that home and we put it in our fireplace in the front room, and we have a little gas heater under there to go. Okay. And it took almost 2 hours to burn it into ashes. So they couldn't go out of the door of their house until morning. All right? Now, we don't know, would God have struck them dead? We don't know, but do you think after hearing the cries of all the dying Egyptians and the wailing of all the animals being killed, that you would dare go out of the house until sunrise? They probably waited until they could see the tip of the sun at the horizon. And of course in Egypt it's all flat. Okay? So, now then, this brings us to chapter 12, and let's pick it up here in verse 36. Oh, verse 30. Okay.
Exodus 12.
Yeah, Exodus 12, verse 31. Now, the King James, when you read it, makes it look like Moses went to Pharaoh. But how do we know that he didn't go to Pharaoh? He had to stay in his house until sunrise, right? Was Moses exempt from any of that? Okay. Okay. Now then. And the Lord said to, let's come over here, chapter 11 and verse 9. Exodus 11, verse 9. And the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not hearken to you, so that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. And Moses and Aaron did all the wonders before Pharaoh, and the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart so that he would not let the children of Israel go out of the land. Then come back here to chapter 10, verse 28. Pharaoh said to him, get away from me, take heed to yourself, see my face no more, for in the day you see my face you shall die. Verse 29, and Moses said, you have spoken well, I will never see your face again. So we have two things that Moses did not go to Pharaoh. Pharaoh sent a message to him. Okay, that's what it should read in verse 31. Now, back to chapter 12, verse 31. And during the night he sent word to Moses and Aaron, saying, get up, get out from my people, both you and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord as you said. Also take your flocks and your herds as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also. I like that last one there, after everything that happened. And the Egyptians were urging the people that they might send them out of the land quickly, for they said, we are all dead men. And the people took their troughs before it was leavened. Now, Dr. Keith Slough, didn't understand about leavened and unleavened bread. They did not have yeast and they did not have baking soda. How did they get their leavened bread? They let it sour. You ever heard of sourdough? That's what it is. You let it sour, and then it takes the yeast spores out of the air, and then it leavens the whole lump. Okay? Now that takes a couple of days, not hours, couple of days. Okay? So before it was leavened, in their kneading troughs and on their shoulders, and the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses, and they asked articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing from the Egyptian, and the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and they granted their request and stripped the Egyptians. Now then, question. Ramses was a treasure city. Guess what they took? Most of the treasure. See? Because the Egyptians didn't know, what is the God going to do tonight? Look what he did last night. Okay? Now, here we go. Let's get all of this. Okay. Question was, who is Dr. Slough? I don't have his biography with me. We'll try and get it, but he has a small church and a small school called Ambassador something, so I'll try and get a little more on it. And another thing was brought up, do you suppose that all the treasures that the children of Israel had went into building the tabernacle? Of course. That's where they got it. All right? Now then, let's continue on. Chapter 12, Exodus, verse 37. The children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth. Now, a short period of time. Short distance. Why was it a short distance? Because they were up all the night before, and then all day, and then they left at sundown, and they went a short distance. And someone would say, well, they didn't leave Egypt. As long as they're under the protection and guidance of God, they left. See? Go forward here. The men being about 600,000 on foot, apart from the little ones, and also a mixed multitude went up with them, and flocks and herds, very much livestock. And they baked unleavened cakes of dough, which they brought out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were driven out of Egypt and could not stay, neither had they prepared any food for themselves for the journey. King James says victuals. Okay. Now, the sojourning of the children of Israel in Egypt was 430 years. That means all of their sojourning, not just when they went into Egypt, when Jacob and the 10 sons came down, 11 sons came down. Okay? 430 years from what? And how do you figure that? Okay? Okay, we'll cover it just a little bit. Verse 41, and it came to pass at the end of 430 years, it was even on that very same day. Okay? What day was the Passover on? 14th. What is the next day? No, it's the 25th. No, it's the 15th. When does the 15th start? At sundown. Okay. All right. Verse 41 again. And it came to pass at the end of 430 years, it was even on that very same day, all the armies of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. It is a night to be much observed to the Lord for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. This is the night of the Lord to be observed by all the children of Israel in their generations. All right. Let's come to Numbers 33 and then we'll take a break. Numbers 33. See, whenever you study any of these things, you have to study all of the intricate things involved. Numbers 33 and verse 1. These are the journeys of the children of Israel who went forth out of the land of Egypt with their armies under the hand of Moses and Aaron. And Moses wrote their goings out according to their journeys by the command of the Lord. All right? And these are their journeyings according to their starting places. They set out from Ramses. Now remember, where were the houses of the children of Israel? Goshen. So they had to, on the day portion of the Passover, spoil the Egyptians on their way to Ramses. Okay? Now notice, in the first month, on the 15th day of the first month, when is the Passover? 14th. This is the next day, right? Okay. And when did they leave? By night. Because it took them all day to get there, get all assembled. Now how are you going to move, say, 1,800,000 people or 600,000 people if you don't have it organized? Well, Moses, when he grew up in Egypt, he became a great general. He knew how to move armies, so he had it all organized. Okay? 15th day of the first month, on the next day after the Passover day. Now that's the correct translation. The children of Israel went out with a high hand in the sight of all the Egyptians, while the Egyptians were still burying their firstborn, whom the Lord had stricken. Now think about the job of burying 20% of the population plus the firstborn of animals. That's a tremendous job. So they were, and of course, they couldn't have everybody out there trying to bury them. Okay? Some of them were giving all of the riches to the Israelites. Some were burying, and they were burying into probably darkness. Okay? Verse 4, while the Egyptians were still burying their firstborn, whom the Lord had stricken, and the Lord also executed judgments upon their gods. Okay? And the children of Israel set out from Ramses, mentions it twice, and pitched in Sukkoth. Okay? Now then, let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll come back, and we will find out what day was that to the very same day, 430 years later, and how do you calculate the 430 years when in Genesis 15 it says 400 years. We're just exactly 1 month away from Passover. So I want to advertise a few things for you. Now, we have a short summary sermon on the last 10 days of Jesus' life. You can write in for it. We have the CD with all the messages on it. Now, if you want a little more in-depth, then you write for the Harmony of the Gospels in modern English, The Life of Jesus Christ. That has the whole thing about everything concerning Christ with commentary, and it is absolutely the best harmony in the world, and I think the only one that actually does it based around the holy days and the Passover. Okay? Then, for an in-depth study, you need the Passover book. Now, all these old heresies of the Passover circulate around. And so we're going to cover some of them. But this is an in-depth study, step by step, of the Passover throughout the whole Bible. And what are the problems that the Jews have? What are the problems that the Protestants have? What are the problems that some of the churches of God have? Now this next one is 44 years old, a paper written by Kuhn and Graby. And this was the initial assault against the Passover in the worldwide Church of God, and was also an assault against the church by the two principles involved in taking it down. Now, when you write for this, you will see that I have in the margin all my first initial comments as I read it. Now, this proves that those who have doctorate degrees, and Robert Kuhn has several of them, that does not prevent them from lying. It does not prevent them from presenting false doctrine, and it doesn't prevent them from deliberately trying to undermine the faith of the true Christians. So you need all of these. Now you write for them, email us, we'll send it to you right away. Now this paper on Kuhn and Graby, I think this was 76, 77, early part of 77, okay? And this is before they started having all the trouble concerning the Passover. Now, the Passover book, this is the third edition. We have sent out a lot of those, and this is absolutely essential for you to completely understand it.